Welcome, everyone, or welcome back if you've been with us before to Season 4 of National Parks Presents. Today is our third of 8 presentations that will take place every other Wednesday evening, all the way up into the end of April. This series covers a multitude of topics, but tonight is focusing on the BPL's overall programming theme that we're running for 2024, which is revolutionary music. And that is not all about drums and fife music, like that's what I think of. It's more about like music for social change and how society uses music. So I'm very excited to hear what's happening. Before I go over the boring Zoom features, I do want to remind people that the Boston Public Library is a repository of National Park Service materials, along with other government publications. And these can be found in the BPL's Research Services Department. So you can always pop by the library, or you can always email ask@bpl.org and get a appointment with a librarian. Also, if you have questions specifically for the Rangers, we can also email them out as well. So now boring Zoom features before we get to Ranger Jen. We are recording. You will notice this whole presentation is about music, but I had to ask about keeping the music more at the end because we are recording and we put these up on YouTube. YouTube does mute out any music when you hit play on the record. So during the live presentation, they don't take it out, but when you go back to rewatch it, you'll notice all the sound turns off and you think it's broken. And that's because they mute it. So to keep it consistent, we just kept music at the end. And that is also why Ranger Jen did not put any specific songs in here throughout. So it's not her, it's YouTube. We blame YouTube. But it will be recorded and it will be on our YouTube page. The last 2 presentations are up there now. If you're like, Karen, you're a liar. I'm not, it just takes some time. But both presentations are up there as we speak. If you are not enjoying the captions that you see below your screen, you can click on the CC button below and turn off the subtitles. And the really fun thing to do throughout this presentation is to ask your questions. Don't be shy at all. Hit that chat button, type in your questions. We just ask you to be respectful. This is one of the rare places that a big webinar like this has the chat open because all of you are wonderful. And as long as we stay respectful, we get to keep it open. And one thing to notice when you ask your question, notice the to form. It's either going to go to everyone, which is everyone you see on the screen and everyone watching back at home, or you can put it just to hosts and panelists, and that is everyone you'll see on the screen. And I think that is all my Zoom stuff. So here we go. Before you leave tonight, a survey will pop up. If you could fill that out, that'd be amazing. That's how we figure out what to do better or what we did great. And honestly, who doesn't love to hear how well they did? Life is hard, so it's nice to have that morale to keep us going. So without any further babbling from me, let's welcome the wonderful Ranger Jen Steele as she presents Boston's Black Musical History. Woo!
Good evening. Thank you, Karen. Again, my name is Jen Steele. I'm a ranger with the National Parks of Boston, or specifically Boston African American National Historic Site. So I'll be presenting my program on Boston's Black musical history. Just before I get started, wanted to say happy Black History Month. Also happy Valentine's Day. But just acknowledging for Black History Month that the 2024 theme is African Americans and the Arts. And then, like Karen mentioned, the Boston Public Library NPS theme for this year is revolutionary music. So that's why I've chosen to focus on Boston's Black musical history. Through learning about this topic, since I can't say I was a musical historian before, or I still can't say I am, but was not well versed in music history, learned that music is considered the queen of the arts. It kind of checks out for me if you think about how music can drive so many different artistic or creative inspirations. So again, I had acknowledged that it is Valentine's Day, so I'm appreciative if you're on this call at this time since he probably could also be doing some other fun things. But Valentine's Day, a day of love for sure, but also acknowledging that February 14th is Frederick Douglass's birthday. So if you're into your Black history, probably something that you're familiar with, Frederick Douglass was actually pretty musically inclined himself and had ties to Boston. So you will notice that I've chosen to kind of talk about different figures that may potentially not be born in Boston, but kind of focusing on the topic of musical styles or genres, trends throughout Boston's history. So I'll get into it. So I'll just talk a little bit about Frederick Douglass to start. He's a great guy, and like I said, since it's his birthday, and he was musically inclined, kind of using him as a figure to open up my presentation. So Frederick Douglass himself was born enslaved in Maryland. He was able to teach himself how to read and write, eventually escaping successfully from enslavement in 1838. He would go on to be a well-known activist, abolitionist, and even a women's suffragist. He'd speak at Faneuil Hall over a dozen times, and I call out Faneuil Hall because I actually work there pretty often. Our staff are interpreting the history of that site regularly, so we tend to talk about Frederick Douglass. However, I don't typically talk about his amateur musical interests. So I have chosen this picture of him later in life with his grandson, Joseph Douglass, who he would go on to share his love of music for. But historians do claim that Douglass was an amateur violinist. So before his grandson, Joseph, would be playing the violin in some capacity. There's also several references to his deep voice and how he really had a way to captivate audiences. So before I talk about his grandson, Joseph, just talking about his perspective on enslaved people and their use of song or spirituals. So from his biography, Douglass addresses songs that enslaved people would sing. So just going to read a quote from him. He says, "Slaves sing most when they are unhappy. The songs of the slave represent the sorrows of his heart, and he is relieved by them, only as an aching heart is relieved by its tears. At least, such is my experience. I have often sung to drown my sorrow, but seldom to express my happiness." I find that quote pretty interesting. We tend to look back at music. We can see some of the different ways that people used songs or music to cope. So potentially you could acknowledge that we're not always happy when we're listening to music. In fact, we could probably all agree or admit to shedding a tear when listening to a song. But Douglass is taking that a bit further, just acknowledging how when enslaved people were singing these songs, himself included, there was no sort of happiness. I think that's sort of ironic with a story that I'll tell about him at the Tremont Temple after the passing of the Emancipation Proclamation, actually after it went into effect on January 1st, 1863. Douglass was here in Boston and was at Tremont Temple. He was able to lead a crowd in a hymnal, "Blow Ye Trumpet Blow," just again referencing his demeanor and his ability to capture audiences. So he talks about how that experience for him and kind of rejoicing throughout the night. So just thinking back to that quote, how he was able to lead this group in "Blow Ye Trumpet Blow." Potentially when I think about this, maybe thinking about how joyful and happy that moment was. But maybe for Douglass, it wasn't so much so. Maybe it reminded him of his time as an enslaved person or the work that needed to be done to get to that point. Like I mentioned, he played the violin and shared that interest with his grandson, Joseph. So there's Joseph playing this violin that was gifted to him by his grandfather. And Joseph Douglas would go on to be a pretty successful violinist, or renowned, you could say, and actually attended the Boston Conservatory. So like I said, use Douglas kind of as my intro, but for moving forward, just going to be talking about different figures throughout the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries to really get us through Boston's timeline. This is a picture of Tremont Temple, since the Tremont Temple that is currently standing is not necessarily the one that Douglas would have sang in. However, there is still a Tremont Temple on Tremont Street in downtown Boston. And I will talk a lot in depth about some figures or places, but did just want to acknowledge that there is I'm covering a wide array of historical figures and trends, so I can't possibly cover everything in the next, I think I'm down to 20-ish minutes or so. So again, I'm acknowledging I'm not a musical historian or professional. There may be people on this call who have greater insight to terminology and things, so feel free to use the chat if there's a figure that maybe you would have highlighted or place, or anything that I could add to my presentation if I ever led this in the future. But I'm going to be presenting what I have for the sake of time, and I'll review the comments in the chat afterwards. So looking forward to that. But you see some of the figures that I'll focus on for the 18th, 19th, and 20th. So just for the 18th, I'll start off with the flutist, an art piece, and then Barzelia Liu. But I just wanted to acknowledge the lack of source material, or how colonial music had evolved from the arrival of various ethnic groups in the New World, and a lot of those inspirations from Africa. But again, limited source material or evidence to confirm who these figures were, or movement of cultural impact, but acknowledging that African music would consist of call and response, which would then lead to different methods using oral processes, especially at a time where maybe not everyone was taught to read. There would also be heavy church or religious influences, so learning music in a house of worship or at church, and tunes developed through military service, or various other ways that people were using music or tunes and melodies. So I'll start with the flutist. Again, a lesser known about figures in the 18th century. We know that enslaved violinists, artists, or musicians would have been playing at social or cultural gatherings. But for this painting, I think this is a great example of a figure who there's less known about this person, but helps to show us that people did exist. And by people, I mean Black artists or Black musicians. So the flutist is a painting that actually is at the Diplomatic Receptions Room in the U.S. Department of State in Washington, D.C. This artist, poser, location, really all of the details about this painting are up for speculation. It's an oil on canvas, and some of the things, elements about the painting can reveal somewhat the time frame. So we see a African-American or Black figure holding music, a piece of music, which if you read close enough, you can see 6 duets by W. Shield, William Shield. So that art musical piece really gives away a date that it could not possibly be before 1777 when that was written, this musical cover. Also, just looking at his attire would kind of give you an idea of a time period. So helps to kind of minimize that speculation. That's also the type of flute that he's holding. So some speculation has led people to believe that this may be a Gilbert Stuart painting. And again, I working at Faneuil Hall, see a lot of Gilbert Stuarts around me, so I could maybe also make that guess that this painting could be done by Gilbert, so also could lead us to believe that it's a figure from the Boston area. So that actually would lead me to my next figure to talk about, Barzillai Lou, however, acknowledging I've also seen speculation that this is not a Gilbert Stuart, this is not Barzillai Lou. So acknowledging that I am not claiming that this piece is Barzillai Lou, but rather it's kind of up for debate, something that we're still pondering on. But again, it gives a great example of an African American artist throughout the 18th century, knowing that it didn't just look like one sort of person. Yeah, speculation has led people to believe it could be Barzillai Lou. I don't have a picture of him, so have seen some references using the flutist photo painting. But Barzillai Lou, there's just a lack of evidence to prove if the painting is him or not. However, there is a good amount of information about Lou and his life. He was born in Groton, Mass. In 1743. And he was born to free African American parents, so would be a free person himself also. He was a fifer or flutist, you could say, and a drummer. And his military service was pretty extensive. So that's why I've added the flag, just acknowledging his participation at the Battle of Bunker Hill and also in the French and Indian War. He'd also participate in the Battle of Fort Ticonderoga. So he's really from that just north of Boston, Lowell area, kind of bounced around between Groton, Dracut, Lowell. Also, Lowell at the time was not necessarily encompassing what we know Lowell to be today. So Lowell, if you're coming from a different part of the world, just about 25, 30 on a good day, minutes above Boston. So Lou is participating in these battles throughout the American Revolution, but also heavily involved with his community in what is referred to as Pawtucketville. So he would live in Pawtucketville later in his life, where he actually was able to marry in 1767. He actually had 13 children. So Barzillai Lou, just an influential guy in his neighborhood, they actually would go on to name a street after him. However, no longer exists as it would be referred to as Old Zeal Road. Now it's just Topman Street. And then I was able to find this map, which if you look close enough in that left-hand corner, you can see Barzillai. Think that it's hard for myself to pronounce the name, but also when you start to see different ways to spell it, that also throws a curveball. But from my understanding, it's Barzillai Lou. So you can see that he is put on the map there. This kind of shows his connection with that area or with his community. He also would attend services at his local church, which is why I've added that. And would be and he's buried at the Lowell Clay Pit Cemetery in an unmarked grave. But the Lou family would go on to be pretty musically inclined for generations following. And Lou descendant, Harry Bucky Lou, was pretty influential, as well as Gerald Lou. I guess I chose not to add a photo of Gerald Lou holding the powder horn that supposedly was Barzillai Lou's throughout the war, but he would go on to be, generations would go on to be musically inclined and impacting various Black history initiatives. His grandson, or I'm sorry, a descendant, Gerald Lou, helped to found the DuSable Museum, which currently holds the powder horn that Lou used during the Revolution. So he's loosely connected with musical history here in Boston, but wanted to acknowledge folks or figures like Lou that would be in this area. And if you could just imagine the streets of Boston kind of filled with music by Black figures and people of all backgrounds. But when we think about Boston's Beacon Hill or North Slope, the area where we lead Black Heritage Trail tours, or historically was a Black neighborhood, not only thinking about some of the efforts that needed to be done for abolition or to address discrimination and racism, but also arts and culture, hearing music just playing through the streets, and music made by Black people. But unfortunately, just a lack of material. There's a couple of musical historians that I became pretty friendly with, would acknowledge their work in trying to uplift musical history. Dr. David Hildebrand, I can drop the link to his website, but just a wealth of knowledge and also just a great connection that was made. So again, not really a musical historian, but learned a lot by doing this. But now moving into the 19th century, feeling a lot more comfortable talking about these figures, since these are kind of some people that I talk about on the regular. And just before I talk about Susan Paul, the 19th century provided an influx of Black migrants to the United States, which also created career opportunities for Black and Brown people. It also created societal opportunities to advance American arts and culture, especially here in Boston. So Susan Paul is a wonderful figure who, again, don't have a photo of or drawing to kind of see what she looked like, but we have a good amount to know about her. She's born in 1809. She's the daughter of Reverend Thomas Paul and Catherine Waterhouse. Paul, if you're familiar with that name, Reverend Thomas Paul, he was the first Reverend of the African Meeting House. So that is the oldest Black church in the nation here in Boston, in Boston's Beacon Hill. So she had an evangelical upbringing. She would be a free African-American school teacher at the Boston Primary School 6 and also at the Abiel Smith School. So those are two schools here in Boston, early 1800s, where she is teaching African-American students. Kind of used that to her advantage when she decided to form a juvenile choir among her students for social change in 1832. The juvenile choir didn't really last long, but definitely had an impact. The purpose of the juvenile choir was to provide entertainment, both at anti-slavery meetings and various other social or community gatherings, and definitely to have representation from Black individuals. Susan Paul may not have been able to predict the outcome when she first started this singing group, but they sang protest music. They'd go to meetings for the Massachusetts Anti-Slavery Society, the New England Slavery Society, at various community groups and clubs. So these were all groups that Susan Paul would be a part of. So just acknowledging she is also an activist, abolitionist. She would join those groups as well as the Boston Female Anti-Slavery Society or Ladies Temperance Society. So you see I added a picture to the right of her participation in the Boston Female Anti-Slavery Society. But fun fact about Susan Paul, she's also known to be the first African-American to publish a biography. So she published a biography on one of her students. She wrote the memoir of James Jackson, the attentive and obedient scholar. So this is an example, or this work really helps to give us clear evidence on the songs that she taught her students, how and why. So she was clearly using the songs, the teachings, to teach them both grammar and spelling, but also the messages behind them. The Paul family lived in Beacon Hill. So I can show you their home to the right, still standing today, formerly 26 George Street, but is today on West Cedar Street. And there is a plaque. That plaque doesn't initially acknowledge her father, but then acknowledges Susan Paul, activist and woman suffragist. I had mentioned that the African Baptist Church, the African Meeting House that her father helped to establish, they actually have named their first floor after her. So if you ever get to visit and you watch a video, you are probably in the Susan Paul room. And then you just see the news clip to the left of her juvenile choir or concert that was held at Columbian Hall. So they were able to host concerts at various different halls here in Boston. It was really fun to learn about all the different venues that they performed at. Columbian Hall, Boylston Market were all places that these Black children were able to bring their messages and sing songs, bringing mixed audiences to tears. So I'm going to move on from Susan Paul to talk about the Fisk Jubilee Singers. Jen, why are you talking about the Fisk Jubilee Singers? I swear it's relevant. So just some background, if you're not familiar with the Fisk Jubilee Singers, they were established in 1871 to raise funds to protect their school from financial ruin. With that, they'd go on to tour the route of the Underground Railroad. I also need to give some context for the picture on the right side, a program for the World's Peace Jubilee, which also was, or not also, in 1872, so a year later, which is when they'd come here to Boston. They'd perform at this huge event hosted in Boston, purposely organized to try to make a bigger and better event from a previous attempt, bringing tons of different groups, musicians, people who are playing instruments, all different types of performers to the Boston Coliseum. So that was a new venue for me, the Boston Coliseum, no longer standing, actually didn't stand for long at all. It was really intended for the sole use of this event to hold about 60,000 people. Would have been around where the main branch of the Boston Public Library is. I actually read a great article on the Boston Public Library's website about this program. If you're interested, I would check out their website. The World's Peace Jubilee was held in 1872, and the Fisk Jubilee singers were able to perform, and they would perform in front of President Grant. President Ulysses S. Grant and the First Lady were there at the World's Peace Jubilee. So they actually invited the Fisk Jubilee Singers to the White House to perform for them. Just acknowledging the fact that the Fisk Jubilee Singers really established a precedent as a successful Black touring group. They changed the perspective on the talents of Black musicians. Once heavily reliant on the racist depictions of Black minstrel shows, the public perception definitely shifted as Fisk Jubilee Singers took their talents to an international stage. So James Monroe Trotter. James Monroe Trotter was born enslaved in Mississippi in 1842. He was educated in Ohio and then actually would join the Massachusetts 55th Regiment in Boston. So he'd travel here to Boston to enlist in 1863. You may be familiar with the Massachusetts 54th Regiment or the Robert Goldshaw and Massachusetts 54th Regiment Memorial. So he was joining the 55th. But he'd participate in the Civil War, and eventually he would go on to fight for equal pay for Black soldiers. He returned to Ohio to marry, but in 1878, Trotter published a review of African American music. So you see that right in the middle there, Music and Some Highly Musical People. Great title. So although his qualifications to publish this work were pretty unclear, he is actually the first music historian to review works by a group of people. So his selections to highlight folk music from the African American community in the 19th century elevated the perceptions of Black societal participation. Some of the folks that he mentioned in his Boston section, I just chose to focus on his Boston section for the sake of my program. One of them being Miss Rachel M. Washington. That was a really great figure that was new to me in developing this program. Potentially one of the first females to graduate from the New England Conservatory. She was also organist at the 12th Baptist Church. He also was reviewing various other community members like W.H. Copeland and Mr. E.M. Allen. I chose them because they also performed at the World's Peace Jubilee. And Georgina Smith in the work of the Progressive Musical Union. Trotter also worked in the United States Postal Office. He was actually the first employed Black postal worker, although he resigned from this position due to racism and discrimination against Black employees. And if this name sounds familiar, it's probably because he is the father of well-known abolitionist activist, Black activist, William Monroe Trotter. William Monroe Trotter is also the publisher of The Guardian. But James Monroe Trotter passed in 1892 from tuberculosis. So although he was not born in Boston, his review of highly musical people definitely made him fit to join this group of people and places. So that was my last figure for 19th. Moving on to the 20th, which may be a bit more exciting. This before I get into the next person or place. The 20th century, with the 20th century came the Great Migration, which heavily impacted Boston's musical scene as new immigrants arrived along with their cultural influences. And then one of those, or example of one of those, is Joseph L. Walcott. I'm excited to see if anyone's been to Wally's, enjoyed music at Wally's, but Wally's Cafe was established in 1947. Just backing up, owner Joseph L. Walcott, or Wally, immigrated from Barbados in 1910. Wally's is located in South End in Boston's intersection at Massachusetts Ave and Commonwealth Ave. And the South End was at the time, throughout the 40s and 50s, home to some famous jazz clubs. But Wally's would join. This was a nightclub that was not only owned and operated by an African American, but open for all people. And Wally's is actually known to be the first Black-owned jazz club in New England. Some figures that have performed there, also just acknowledging Wally up on the right top corner, but some figures below him, pretty well-known names like saxophonist Charlie Parker, drummer Art Blakely, and singer Billie Holiday all have performed here. But eventually, as the big band era would diminish, Wally's rebranded as Wally's Paradise. And in 1978, not unfamiliar from other South End businesses and homes, Wally's faced eminent domain takeover by the city of Boston's State Highway Project. So the following year, Wally's closed its original location and moved directly across the street, where it still stands today. You can see a picture of it on the left-hand side. So I'm moving on pretty quickly. Hope that's okay. So we have Donna Summer in the disco era. Donna Summer, really a fun figure to talk about, was actually born here in Boston in 1948. Her real name's LaDonna Adrienne Gaines. She grew up in Mission Hill. And that's her in the middle holding up her diploma from the Jeremiah E. Burke High School. So local connection for any BPS folks out there. And she also attended the Grant AME church with her family every Sunday. So she definitely had the religious upbringing or influences from her participation in church services. She appreciated the music actually of Mahalia Jackson from a young age. Mahalia Jackson, if you're not familiar, is kind of nicknamed the Queen of Soul. So it would set a precedent for Summers, who would then follow her and gain her title as the Queen of Disco. Summer would take that nickname and run with it by various news outlets. Had a pretty successful career. She was creating a style or an artistic concept with some of her songs like I Feel Love, Love to Love You Baby, and Last Dance, really having these tracks, hoping that other artists were using them or potentially being used in popular culture, which today I could attest to. These songs are still frequently added in movies or TV shows. But some of her more well-known songs would be like Bad Girls, Hot Stuff, and She Works Hard for Her Money. And she did. She was a 5-time Grammy Award winner, and she's inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. But Donna Summer passed in 2012 from lung cancer at the age of 63. However, the city of Boston hosts an annual disco party in her legacy at Boston City Hall Plaza. All right, I have to admit, these are my last folks to talk about New Edition. So New Edition was a popular boy band in the 1970s, and they were actually formed right in Roxbury's Orchard Park projects in 1979. So the group, pretty young in these photos, consisted of several different members over time. In total, there would have been 7, but initially starting off with 5, and then some people stepping away or being added to the group. So those initial figures or members would be Bobby Brown, Ralph Tresvant, which is the lead singer, Ricky Bell, Michael Bivins, Ronnie DeVoe, and eventually Johnny Gill. A song that may be familiar for folks is Candy Girl from 1987. And they would perform at well-known venues like the Strand Theater, which is a historically Black music club, still operates today in Dorchester's Upham Corner. However, when Bobby Brown stepped away from the group in 1985, he was pursuing a solo career, and then Johnny Gill joined the group, so he's the only non-Boston native. They eventually would form different offshoot groups as others would go pursue a solo career, and eventually the group disbanded. And then Michael Bivins has a basketball park named after him in Roxbury. But the group received a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame in 2017. New Edition has also won 2 American Music Awards, a Lifetime Achievement Award, and at the 2017 BET Awards. There's also a nice mini-series on them that BET produced. So you can see the Strand Theater there and some pictures of this group at a pretty young age. So that is mostly what I have prepared. I did want to make an acknowledgement since I did not go into the 21st century. So Boston is nicknamed the hub for a reason, the epicenter of so much different activity here in the Northeast, especially with our diverse cultural talents. So there are some highly musical people out there for sure. I've, through my research, learned about the African American Ball that is hosted to uplift the work of musicians and artists, not just in Boston, but across the state. Uh, so Boston is contributing to the music industry worldwide. New artists are making their mark over the city, around the city and beyond, in places like the Strand, Wally's, Symphony Hall, and wherever else you can sit back and enjoy music in the city. There's also various community groups, podcasts. One of the contributors to the Boston Magazine that spoke in depth about New Edition. He's also a community member with that insight. Has a organization that is working on preserving Boston's Black musical impact. So although I don't have names to provide you, just wanted to provide an acknowledgement to the work that these folks are doing. So the musical history hopefully lives on. So these are just the folks that I had prepared to talk about today. But I can stop sharing my screen.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jen. Definitely interesting to be able to kind of trace the history through the centuries of Boston and its Black Boston and its musical connections. So do have a couple of questions that came in through the chat. First is a pretty simple one, but was Bobby Brown from New Edition the one who married Whitney Houston?
Yeah, that's the same Bobby Brown.
Yes. Had another question about who was your favorite Boston artist that you came across through research or just kind of being a general fan?
Oh, that is tricky because I obviously like started to jam out to all of them. Or had an appreciation, like I said, Trotter, it was kind of like, why would you write a musical review? But then really had some respect for the fact that he put that together. So I would say it is between Susan Paul and Rachel Washington, M. Washington, but I'm going to go with Rachel M. Washington just because her singing, her ability to play instruments, I just thought that was really cool.
Awesome. I had another question about the role of in your research. I don't know if you came across any of this, but the role of Black musicians or Black music in civil rights protests and activism in Boston. So wondering if there's anything you came across that you might be able to speak a little bit to that.
Yeah, sorry, sometimes it helps me to read as well. Black music and civil rights protests or activism. I mean, yeah, the music, I think that we could really highlight the songs that Susan Paul's juvenile choir had been singing. So using the words and then kind of reminding ourselves like, oh, she was teaching children those words. But what's worse is the fact that those things were actually happening, the discrimination and enslavement in other states. So some of the words or songs that she was teaching her students, they were a bit difficult. So that's why I say that audiences would be crying. But that's a way that I think we could open up the connection between music and social justice.
Awesome. Thank you. And then what is your top song recommendation from your research?
Oh, that's a good question. Candy Girl got stuck in my head for sure. And then I just like would love to hear if I could recreate this like the blow ye trumpet blow, like if there is a way to capture a large group of people singing that. I think that would be really cool. Yes, I wanted to acknowledge Tracy Chapman as well. I think I was not too sure when I started to develop this program how specific to Boston I needed to be. This is something that Sean helped me figure out. Like I had Donna Summers, who was born and raised New Edition, but then other figures who were not born and raised. So
Awesome.
I did think I saw one other question, or the question that Karen had sent us before. Just the
Right, yes. The question, are there any historic homes or spaces associated with one or more of Boston's Black female musicians?
Yeah, that I would love to look more into, but just like I had mentioned, Rachel Washington graduating from the New England Conservatory, as well as the Susan Paul Room at the African Meeting House. But we could always, and obviously the disco party held at City Hall for Donna Summer. But we could always have at least one more plaque or something to acknowledge women. I'd say more than one.
Awesome. Great. Well, thanks again, Jen. And with that, I'm happy to turn it back over to Karen to close us out.
Sorry, I'm still focusing on, yes, I would like to have more than one plaque. That would be great. Jen, this was absolutely epic. Thank you so much. I'm really excited to actually go down my own research rabbit hole because I took little notes on where I was going to go. And I love these so much. Also, my own little plug for when I saw the Donna Summer pictures, I instantly thought Beyonce and how she's so she has these amazing visuals that go with her music. And so I was like, oh my God, I wonder if Donna Summer also did her own visuals to go with her own music. Anyway, thank you everyone so much for joining us on your wonderful Valentine's Day evening. And please join us again in 2 weeks for, I believe I popped it in the chat. It is Scientists in the Harbor, Stories of Discovery from the Boston Harbor Islands in 2 weeks. And I did promise you a little music at the end. So we're going to get played out by some beautiful Donna Summer. Take it away.
So let's dance.